Hello and welcome to the presentation on the Lake Loma Algae Control Plan. We originally presented a draft plan at a community meeting in October 2019, and as a part of that meeting, gathered feedback to finalize the plan that you are watching now. However, only 13 people from the community attended that meeting, so we wanted to record this presentation to ensure that interested community members could learn more about the plan and the recommendations supported at the 2019 meeting. I am Katie Ruthenberg, and I work for the Lake Management Group at Snohomish County Surface Water Management. Surface water management is the county's stormwater utility, which reduces the impacts of flooding by maintaining drainage infrastructure and also enhances our water resources by inspecting stormwater facilities, responding to water quality complaints, and educating residents to prevent pollution. My coworkers Marissa Bergdorf and Jen Oden have also contributed to this plan, and we can all be reached by emailing lakes@snoco.org if you have any questions. A large part of this plan has been made possible by a group of volunteers at Lake Loma, so I wanted to say thank you and acknowledge the hard work of community members that have collected data at Lake Loma over the last 25 years. This presentation will discuss historical water quality problems and residents' concerns, findings from this study, potential algae control options, and steps that the community could take to address algae issues. From here, the presentation will be given by Taylor Spooner, who is one of our freshwater ecology interns in 2021.
As many of you may be aware, the primary problems associated with Lake Loma today are related to algae blooms. While not inherently bad for lake health, excess algae blooms reduce water clarity, deplete oxygen levels needed for fish, can lower property values, and can be toxic to people, pets, and wildlife. Before proceeding, we wanted to cover the steps that you should take if a toxic algae bloom is present at Lake Loma. If you see something blue to green in color floating at the lake surface, report it to surface water management staff by phone or email. If toxins are found, we will post a warning sign like the one shown here at the public access site for the lake. If posted, follow the guidelines on the warning signs. We'll also send a notification to lake residents via our email alert system, which you can sign up for on our website or by giving us a call. If a warning sign isn't posted but you see an algae bloom, the best piece of advice is to, when in doubt, stay out. If you look here, you can see that microcystin is the primary toxic of concern and has been detected in Lake Loma since 2005. Microcystin is a liver toxin, and guidelines set by the Washington State Department of Health place the threshold value for recreational safety at 6 parts per billion. Since monitoring began, microcystin concentrations of over 100 parts per billion have been recorded. The question that often comes to mind in response to these findings is, why is this happening? Ultimately, toxic algae problems at Lake Loma can be traced back to phosphorus pollution. Although phosphorus is a key nutrient for freshwater lakes, this nutrient is typically only found in very small concentrations. Excessive phosphorus pollution enables the excess growth of algae, with 1 ounce of phosphorus producing up to 31 pounds of algae. As shown in the picture here, the section of the lake fertilized by phosphorus is much greener and has substantially more algae than the side that does not. Considering these issues, much of the community has been left wondering what can be done. In response, Snohomish County has developed a Lake Loma Algae Control Plan, which focuses on understanding the problem, developing a plan to address the problem, and outlining potential avenues for implementation of said plan. Prior to discussing specifics related to the Algae Control Plan, it is important to clarify that this plan will not address issues related to lake levels, bird populations, or aquatic plants. So there are 5 different parameters that are analyzed to judge lake health and to better understand the problem at Lake Loma overall. More specifically, these parameters include temperature and dissolved oxygen, water clarity, phosphorus, algae, and lastly, shorelines. So then based on available data, each of these categories can then be assigned a health rating of excellent, good, fair, or poor. In assigning these different health ratings, it is important to note that lakes vary naturally. Not all lakes are expected to be in excellent condition for all parameters. Instead, what we expect to see is that larger lakes like Lake Stevens as having more excellent ratings across the 5 parameters, whereas smaller lakes like Lake Loma tend to naturally have more fair conditions. Concerns only really arise when lake health for a parameter falls into the poor condition or if lake health for a certain parameter is changing rapidly. Looking first at temperature, there's a significant amount of variability that happens between seasons. During the winter, temperatures throughout the lake are cold and homogeneous, meaning that the water is well mixed and essentially the same throughout. During the summer, however, the lake surface becomes much warmer than the bottom of the lake due to heating from the sun. These temperature differences give rise to density differences as well, with the warmer waters of the surface being lower density than the cooler waters underneath. The result is stratification of the lake waters, which means that two distinct layers of water form which no longer mix with one another. In the fall, the top waters begin to cool once again, and this reduces the temperature and density differences that happen during the summer between these layers. This allows them to mix once more, and this phenomenon is often referred to as fall turnover. This graph shows the actual water temperatures taken in Lake Loma between 2016 and 2017. If you look at the left-hand side of your screen here, you can see the depth of the water taken in feet versus the temperature of the water here in degrees Fahrenheit on the x-axis. And so in the winter, we can see that the water temperature is pretty much the same throughout, as we had talked about earlier. At the top of the water, it's about 42 degrees. All the way down the bottom, it doesn't really change. Now, if we go and look in May, for instance, things start to change quite drastically. At the top of the water, it's quite warm, and then it tapers off down to the bottom. You can see that stratification beginning to occur. Dissolved oxygen levels follow a similar trend to that of water temperature. During the winter, dissolved oxygen levels are high and the same throughout the water column. In the summer, stratification begins with the top waters being high in oxygen relative to the bottom waters. Again, these layers begin to remix when turnover occurs in the fall. Here's a graphical representation of the dissolved oxygen levels within Lake Loma during the monitoring period of 2016 and 2017. During the winter, you can see that the dissolved oxygen levels are high and constant throughout the entirety of the water column. During the summer, this is not the case, with stratification occurring around 5 feet in depth and the oxygen levels at the bottom of the lake being nearly zero. Again, fall turnover occurs in, of course, fall, and we can see that those dissolved oxygen levels begin to get higher and more consistent throughout the entirety of the water column. So moving on to the next measure of lake health, we look at water clarity. Water clarity is simply how far down into the water one can see, and is determined by the use of a black and white disc known as a Secchi disc. There are three things that impact water clarity, and these include sediment, algae, and water color. Overall, the water color of Lake Loma is quite dark, and this is due to the presence of tannins and humic acid compounds. These contribute to the consistently poor water clarity that's been exhibited since about the mid-1990s, and has been shown by this red dashed line here. There's been a small but statistically significant decline in water clarity in recent decades. That said, it should be noted that this decline has been primarily attributed to changes in water color as opposed to additional suspended particles or algae in the lake. Here we compare the water clarity of Lake Loma to that of other area lakes. The gray dot for each lake represents a long-term summer average for Secchi depth at that particular lake. If we look at the long-term average for Lake Loma, as shown by the red arrow, we can see that this lake has the fourth lowest water clarity of all the lakes monitored within Snohomish County. So the next health parameter that is examined is phosphorus, and this can be subdivided into phosphorus in the upper lake waters and phosphorus in the bottom lake waters. Phosphorus in the upper lake waters is sampled at a depth of 1 meter and is used as an indicator for recent pollution to the lake. Looking at total phosphorus concentrations in the upper waters of Lake Loma over time, we can see that the majority of readings fall within the poor category. Comparing Lake Loma to other area lakes in terms of the upper water phosphorus concentrations during the summer, we can see that Lake Loma ranks the 5th highest in terms of this parameter. Most of the phosphorus that enters the lake eventually sinks through the water column and is then stored in the lake sediments. This stored phosphorus can be released back into the lower waters of the lake during periods of low oxygen. Looking back at the dissolved oxygen graph that was shown earlier, we can see that this is especially concerning and is a potential issue during summer months when stratification occurs. So although the release of phosphorus back into the lake's bottom waters is a concern during the summer months when dissolved oxygen is low, we can see that the long-term trend for bottom water phosphorus at Lake Loma is still categorized as fair overall. Comparing Lake Loma to other area lakes, it can be noted that this lake is ranked at number 11 in terms of average bottom water phosphorus concentrations as delineated by the red arrow. The next metric used to assess the health of Lake Loma is algae. Prefacing the results for this parameter, it should be clarified that algae is not necessarily bad. These photosynthetic organisms form the base of the food chain in lake ecosystems and support many other organisms as a result. So here we can see a chart similar to those used to discuss other lake health parameters, though this time for chlorophyll A. So chlorophyll A is a green pigment which is used by all algae to conduct photosynthesis and is an indicator of the algae concentrations within the water column as a result. So it's shown graphically here. You can see the algae concentrations for Lake Loma typically fall into the poor or fair categories depending on the year, but overall the categorization for this parameter is poor. Relative to other area lakes, we can see that Lake Loma ranks as the 7th highest in terms of chlorophyll A concentrations, with a long-term average summer concentration of 13.2 milligrams per liter. The last parameter analyzed for lake health determination is the status of the lake's shoreline. Healthy shorelines have a high proportion of native vegetation intact, which provides habitat and also filters out phosphorus pollution as well. So based on a study between 2008 and 2009, it was found that approximately 45% of the shoreline along Lake Loma is at or near a natural state, whereas the remaining 55% has been altered in some way. So while the numbers have likely changed since the study took place, this places the overall shoreline health of Lake Loma at the fair condition. So by combining all the lake health parameters discussed individually, we can see that the overall health of Lake Loma is poor. So when characterizing the external sources that contribute to phosphorus pollution in Lake Loma, it's important to understand that lakes are a reflection of their watershed, such that most water and pollution enters from within the watershed. For those who are unfamiliar, the term watershed refers to the area where all water drains into a common point. So the yellow outline here delineates the watershed for Lake Loma, and this is the area, like I mentioned, that all water flows into the lake. The water can find its way into Lake Loma via rain, runoff, and groundwater flow in the watershed. Unsurprisingly, many different pollutants can tag along with water as it moves through the watershed via these avenues. Phosphorus is really no exception. When water picks up phosphorus from the surrounding area and deposits it into the lake, this is referred to as external loading. So while phosphorus can get into Lake Loma from surrounding areas, phosphorus that's already settled out into the lake bottom can also be recycled back into the water column. This process is referred to as internal phosphorus release or internal loading, and happens when dissolved oxygen levels are low. The first external phosphorus source that was quantified was rainfall directly onto the lake's surface. To find the amount of phosphorus entering the lake from the source each year, we first had to estimate the amount of rain that was falling onto the lake. This was done using a Snohomish County rain gauge located at the neighboring Lake Crabapple. Here you can see the annual rainfall totals between 2008 and 2018. Taking a 10-year average from these results, we found that the average amount of rain in this area in any given year was 38.2 inches, as shown by this purple bar on the right. Phosphorus concentrations found in local rainwater were determined using figures published by the Washington State Department of Ecology. Ultimately, we concluded that phosphorus contributions from direct rainfall amounted to 2.1 kilograms per year, or a very small amount, as we will see momentarily. The next external loading source examined was runoff, which includes water flowing off properties and from seasonal inlet streams. Surface runoff picks up pollution as it moves over the land surface. Sources of residential pollution include fertilizers, animal waste, and bare soils. While not pollution per se, runoff piped directly into the lake and shoreline changes both increase pollution from residential sources, as natural processes can no longer filter it out before entering the lake. In addition to residential sources, forested areas and streets within the watershed were also examined for contributions to phosphorus pollution. In order to quantify the amount from each source, we analyzed the land use types within the watershed. Using these different land uses, we estimated the total amount of phosphorus entering the lake through runoff annually. In total, phosphorus loading from runoff was estimated at 16.2 kilograms per year, with just under 2/3 of that total coming from residential areas. Forested areas and streets contributed 36% of the total annual input combined. While we estimated that phosphorus from surface runoff was 16.2 kilograms per year, it's important to note that the timing of this runoff is not evenly distributed. Instead, the majority of runoff is concentrated in the late fall and early spring when rain levels are the highest. The last source examined for contributions to external phosphorus loading in Lake Loma was pollution from groundwater. Water that doesn't flow over the surface as runoff infiltrates into the ground. Once infiltrated, this water then flows through the soil where it can pick up phosphorus as groundwater before ultimately feeding into Lake Loma. The main place where groundwater picks up phosphorus is via septic systems. All 106 homes located in the Lake Loma watershed rely on septic systems to dispose of wastewater. Of these 106 septic systems, old gravity-based systems make up 70% of the total and have an average age of just over 42 years. While designed to last, the older the system is, the more likely it is to have an issue. So why do septic systems contribute so much phosphorus pollution to groundwater? Wastewater from homes is rich in phosphorus, and this wastewater is deposited into the drain field of a septic system. Once in the drain field of a properly functioning system, this wastewater infiltrates into the ground where the phosphorus binds to soil particles. However, when a system is poorly maintained or is failing, the wastewater saturates the soil with phosphorus. This prevents the soil from absorbing new phosphorus and makes groundwater pollution more likely. Since old septic systems are more likely to be poorly maintained or fail, this is especially concerning in Lake Loma where most systems are so old. So how much phosphorus is entering Lake Loma from groundwater? Measuring the exact contribution from groundwater is expensive because it requires a full groundwater study. The cost estimate to conduct a full groundwater study was around $150,000, which was not attainable given budgetary constraints. Instead, Surface Water Management used data from 2 previous studies to estimate this figure. In total, groundwater contributions were estimated to be between 6 kilograms per year using a 1986 study by Antranco and 27 kilograms per year using a 2013 study by the Department of Ecology. Given this large range, we present and give recommendations that take both of these estimates into account. Looking beyond sources of external phosphorus, we also analyze contributions from the release of phosphorus bound to bottom sediments, otherwise known as internal loading. In order to determine the amount of phosphorus that was present in lake sediments, sediment cores were taken with a piston core sampler as shown in these pictures. This graph shows the phosphorus levels present in the 3 sediment cores taken from Lake Loma in comparison to other Washington lakes. The top of the graph shows total phosphorus levels, while the left side of the graph shows the sediment depth. So as you can see here, the phosphorus levels present in the Lake Loma sediment cores were very high even in comparison to other area lakes that suffered from chronic algae blooms, such as Lake Ketchum and Wapato Lake. Given how high the sediment phosphorus levels are at Lake Loma, we would expect to see a very high level of internal loading as well, but the available data shows that this isn't the case. As you can see here, when compared to Lake Ketchum, internal loading is much lower despite phosphorus levels being magnitudes higher. We believe that this is due to the type of phosphorus present at the lake bottom, and while we're happy that the rate of internal loading is low at the moment, we are still concerned that this could increase in the future. One of the reasons sediment phosphorus levels are so high relative to other area lakes is due to fisheries management by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. In the 1950s, the department conducted several treatments that were intended to raise pH and add nutrients to stimulate algae growth for fish consumption. While the exact amount left behind is currently unknown, it is believed that much of the phosphorus found in Lake Loma's sediments came from these treatments. Now that we've figured out how much each source contributes, we can combine all of them to see that Lake Loma receives about 43 to 64 kilograms of phosphorus pollution each year. This range comes from the uncertainty about how much groundwater is contributing to the lake. This high amount of phosphorus loading is enough to grow between 40 and 60 tons of algae, so a lot of algae. However, this is still much lower than lakes with more chronic toxic algae problems. For example, neighboring Lake Ketchum had about 10 times that amount prior to restoration. So what options are available to Lake Loma residents to address the issue of phosphorus pollution? Here we will evaluate the different lake restoration alternatives, relative costs of each option, and the alternative that Surface Water Management determined to be the best solution. We evaluated 3 different methods of algae control: controlling algae directly, preventing external loading, and reducing internal loading from sediments. Direct algae control measures include algicides, shading products, and ultrasonic devices. Algicides are applied directly to the water to kill algae cells. Although algicides do successfully get rid of algae that is present at the time of treatment, once treated, the dead algae sinks through the water column where the phosphorus becomes available again for growth of new algae. Shading products block sunlight, and ultrasonic devices break down algae cells to prevent growth. However, current research shows that these may work in small ponds but are ineffective in larger systems like Loma. Next, we'll talk about options that prevent and reduce external loading of phosphorus. These solutions will address phosphorus from groundwater and surface runoff. The first strategy to prevent external phosphorus pollution is Snohomish County's LakeWise program. LakeWise was designed to empower lake area landowners to reduce phosphorus pollution from their homes. LakeWise is a property certification program where residents living near a lake can complete a checklist of actions to prevent pollution from their lawns, yards, and septic systems. Once complete, landowners receive a LakeWise certification sign to recognize their efforts to protect the lake. It's completely voluntary and anyone living near a lake can participate. The actions are broken down into the 2 categories of lawn and yard care and septic system care. It includes steps like avoiding fertilizers with phosphorus, maintaining septic systems, and picking up pet waste. Shoreline landowners can also earn an optional Healthy Shoreline certification by replacing some lawn with more deeply rooted vegetation such as shrubs, trees, and perennials. Lakewise begins with a free educational site visit to your property. Snohomish County's watershed steward will walk you through the checklist, answer any questions you may have, and help to find the best solutions for your property. Another piece of the Lakewise program are the free educational workshops. The first is a natural lawn care workshop that teaches you techniques to grow healthy, beautiful, and easy to care for yards and gardens that are safer for your family, pets, and environment. Lawn care workshops are typically held during spring and fall and are offered either in person or via Zoom. The second is a septic system workshop that teaches you how to maintain your system to avoid expensive repairs as well as protect your family and lake. You can also earn a $200 rebate for septic inspections and installation of risers. Additional assistance is offered for shoreline landowners interested in creating a healthy shoreline via the Healthy Shores certification. Replacing lawns with more deeply rooted plants is critical for phosphorus reduction because they absorb 9 times more pollution than a lawn. We provide shoreline landowners with shoreline planting guides, free native plants, and help to develop planting designs as well. It is critical to maintain a healthy shoreline if you already have one, so you can also receive a Healthy Shores certification this way. Here's an example of a shoreline prior to planting. And here's that same shoreline after planting. As you can see, planting native plants is not only a way to prevent lake pollution and support local wildlife, but it can also add beauty to your shoreline while maintaining your views and lake access as well. About 1/3 of the households in the Lake Loma watershed have participated in Lakewise. Of these 35 households that have taken part, 11 are fully certified and 5 have received their Healthy Shoreline certification. The great thing about Lakewise is that it already exists. You can participate today, and it enables you to be a part of the solution to prevent phosphorus pollution from entering the lake. We encourage you to get started with Lakewise by either signing up for a site visit or attending one of our free educational workshops by visiting www.lakewise.org. While Lakewise is one strategy to reduce external phosphorus pollution, there are additional approaches that more specifically target potential inputs from septic systems. The first solution was to sewer the Lake Loma area, which was explored in 2 studies during the 70s and 80s. The estimated cost to bring sewer into the Lake Loma community was around $30 million, making this option cost prohibitive. The second option explored was to retrofit existing systems with new technologies, such as membrane bioreactors. Each retrofit would cost about $40,000 to $70,000, therefore it was rejected as a feasible option. Preventative maintenance is difficult because it is out of sight, out of mind. Therefore, the third option looked at was to work with a local water provider, such as the Seven Lakes Water District, to develop a program that incorporates septic maintenance into the water bill of residents. Such a program would be similar to the one that was implemented successfully at Lake Rossiter and would alleviate headache associated with maintaining septic systems while preventing the septic failures via early detection. However, since this program is only in the conceptual stage, a significant amount of time and effort would still need to be invested. Having addressed options that cover direct algae control and external phosphorus loading, the last category of alternatives are those that reduce internal loading of phosphorus from lake sediments. One way to control internal loading is to physically remove the upper lake sediments, which are phosphorus rich, via dredging. Dredging can be effective, although it also comes at a total cost of $14.8 million. Additionally, dredging destroys a lake ecosystem and would be unlikely to be permitted. The next option was to install aerators at the lake bottom. The idea is that adding oxygen to the lake bottom will prevent the release of phosphorus from the lake sediments during summer. While this can be highly effective, the lake sediments need to have plenty of iron to bind all of the phosphorus. Given that the sediment core study showed the iron levels do not meet this criteria, this approach would not only be ineffective, but would actually increase phosphorus levels in the lake. Another way to reduce phosphorus both in the water column and in the lake sediments is with alum or aluminum sulfate. Alum works by stripping phosphorus out of the lake water and permanently binding to phosphorus in the sediments, making it unavailable for algae growth. This is the most common and successful method for addressing phosphorus pollution globally and has been successfully implemented locally at Lake Ketchum. Alum is a very safe chemical and is widely used to remove drinking water impurities and process pickles. While it's safe, the primary risk in aquatic systems is that it can lower lake pH since it is an acid. This can harm aquatic plants, and to prevent this change in pH, a buffer solution is added. As you saw earlier, Lake Loma already has a lot of phosphorus in the lake sediments, and more is entering the system every single year. Due to this, a large amount of alum is needed to neutralize all the phosphorus present. We found that the specific dose needed was 41.3 milligrams of alum per liter, plus additional alum treatments over the long term to continue inactivating new phosphorus entering the lake. The first way to treat Lake Loma with alum is to administer the entire dose at once. This would equate to 23,640 gallons of alum and 11,820 gallons of buffer, or approximately 9 tanker truck loads worth of treatment. The main benefit to treating the entire lake at once is that it will neutralize all phosphorus that currently exists in the water column and sediments of Lake Loma, which will give lake residents immediate results. That said, because there is still phosphorus entering the lake each year, we are not certain how long a whole lake alum treatment will last. This means that future treatments will likely be needed to neutralize new phosphorus, not to mention that this approach is logistically challenging due to the volume of treatment needed. Another approach to alum treatment is to spread out the total dosage over multiple years. 50% of the total treatment would be applied in the first year, and the remainder would be split up into smaller annual doses for another 9 years. Multi-year treatments would still provide immediate results while costing less money up front. Using the multi-year strategy would also allow us to fine-tune the alum dosing in subsequent years to address both past and future phosphorus pollution more accurately. This ability to tweak dosing is especially important given the uncertainty regarding phosphorus contributions from groundwater that were discussed earlier. That said, more site visits means a higher cost to mobilize resources, and alum prices can potentially rise over time. A third option is to implement a hybrid strategy where alum treatment is paired with aeration. As you may recall, aeration was rejected as a feasible strategy on its own because it was forecasted to increase phosphorus pollution in the lake. That said, this is not the case when paired with alum injection. While the system would still release phosphorus from the lake sediments via aeration, alum injection would ensure that this phosphorus is neutralized before it can become an issue for the lake. This approach would require the installation of 3 aerators on the lake bottom, a small mechanical plant to power these aerators, and a network of piping anchored to the lake bottom. Designing, permitting, construction, maintenance, and repair of permanent infrastructure would all be required for successful implementation. This strategy would be highly effective in neutralizing both past and future phosphorus pollution in Lake Loma while allowing for adaptive management similar to multi-year alum treatments. This method would also provide additional benefits for fish due to the increased dissolved oxygen levels resulting from aeration. That said, the infrastructure requirements to implement this strategy means that the upfront costs would be higher and that there would be additional operational and maintenance costs. The alum required for injection could also become more expensive over time. Of all the alternatives considered, 5 emerged as effective and financially feasible. These include the county's Lake-Wise program, a septic care savings program, a whole lake alum treatment subdivided into multi-year doses, and the combination of continuous alum injection with an aerator system. As you can see, alternatives 1 and 2 only address external phosphorus sources, and in terms of water quality, this essentially means that we are slowing the deterioration of lake health. In contrast, implementing alternatives 3, 4, or 5 would actually reverse the water quality trend at Lake Loma and restore lake health. These alternatives would produce immediate results that would reduce the frequency and intensity of algae blooms, lessen the chance of toxic blooms, create a clearer lake, and increase the abundance of aquatic plants. If both categories of recommended actions are implemented, you can expect a clearer lake, lower phosphorus levels, and less algae. Since Shoreline Health is dependent on the willingness for shoreline landowners to participate in restoring native vegetation via Lake-Wise, changes to this parameter are unknown. Now to the all-important question, how much does all of this cost? To quantify the financial commitment of each alternative, we broke down the cost into annual totals over the first 4 years and estimated the total cost after 10 years. Since the Lake-Wise program is funded through surface water management, this alternative is free currently. The cost of implementing a septic care savings program is largely unknown due to the uncertainty surrounding administrative costs. A whole lake alum treatment would be in the middle ground in terms of upfront cost, with a follow-up treatment around year 10, bringing the total to $289,000. Multi-year alum treatments would be the cheapest upfront, coming out to $290,000 over 10 years. A lake aeration and alum injection system would be substantially more expensive, both upfront and over the long term, totaling between $439,000 to $960,000 in the end. Implementation of alternatives 3 through 5 would also require year-round monitoring, which is $9,500 per year, or $95,000 over 10 years. Here you can see the estimated cost per parcel, assuming a total of 88 shoreline parcels. A whole lake alum treatment would carry a $2,102 price tag per parcel in the first year, or $3,284 over 10 years. The multi-year alum treatment approach would be significantly cheaper upfront at $1,182 per parcel, or $3,295 in 10 years. Again, we can see that a lake aeration and alum injection system would be substantially more expensive, costing each landowner more both up front and over the long term. Monitoring costs break down to $108 per parcel per year, or $1,080 over 10 years. While these numbers can be quite overwhelming, funding options are available to help lessen the financial burden. Most notably, the Washington State Department of Ecology offers a freshwater algae grant, which actually helped fund this algae control plan. The grant is $75,000 with an additional $25,000 match. Eligibility requires application by a public entity such as the county, and it would also require Snohomish County to give approval for grant application subject to sufficient budget and staffing. Other likely sources of funding are from the local community, and the first of these options is a lake association. This is the least formal of the local funding options, and there are several different ways that the community can set up these associations. These ways range from one-time voluntary collections to an incorporated lake association that collects annual dues. Typically, these types of associations can't require dues from all homeowners, making it potentially problematic to fund a plan of this scale. The second option is a Lake Management District, or LMD, which is established in the Washington State Administrative Code to provide a legal tool for lake area landowners to collect funds from all community members. LMDs are formed using the county's legislative authority to collect fees for a specific length of time and require numerous procedural steps, including voting from all community members. Although this is a great tool for funding, it is extremely expensive relative to other options, with administrative costs being up to $50,000. The last alternative is a surface water management surcharge. All county residents currently pay a surface water management utility charge as part of their annual tax bill. This charge funds all surface water management services, including fixing drainage problems, cleaning up water pollution, and improving stormwater systems. It also funds our lake management program as well. Residents can request that the county council add in an additional surcharge to fund a specific surface water management activity, such as lake restoration, for a designated period of time. The funds from this charge can only be used for the designated activity. The charge is established as part of the county code and must be approved by the county council, which requires broad community support. The primary advantage includes much lower administrative costs relative to other options and allowing for senior exemptions. Surcharge establishment is also dependent upon county staff availability for setup and administration. So now that we have laid out the foundation for action by the local community via the Lake Loma Algae Control Plan, the question remains as to whether the plan should be implemented. Ultimately, the next steps in reducing toxic algae occurrences in Lake Loma come down to the community's discretion. It is up to you, the landowners, to decide if the benefits of reducing toxic algae are worth the cost of implementing these alternatives. If the decision is made to move forward, a committee of landowners within the Lake Loma watershed should be created to more fully explore these questions as a community, determine sources of funding, and begin coordinating efforts with Snohomish County. Thank you for taking the time to tune in this discussion over the Lake Loma Algae Control Plan. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to the Surface Water Management Lake Specialist Team by phone at 425-388-3464 or by email at lakes@snoco.org. For more information about Lake Loma, visit www.loma.surfacewater.info.